God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in him. Welcome back to Why Hope, the video series that explores reasons for hope in our day. This is Season 5, Episode 3. In Season 5, as you may know, we're exploring reasons that we can hope as we look around our world, which point us towards the faithfulness and love of God. And in this third and final episode of this season, we're going to explore human love and how that points us towards the love and faithfulness of God. Well, I opened by quoting some words from the first epistle of John, chapter 4. I'll say them again to you. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in him. Now here the apostle is exploring human love and divine love quite richly. There's far more in this passage that I'm going to be able to draw out right now. But even from this little snapshot, we get a sense of the fact that when we see human love, we are seeing a glimpse of divine love. And this makes sense, doesn't it? We were exploring, I think it was last week, we were exploring how we are made in the image of God. And so all that is best in us derives from our imagehood. Everything that we see and in others and do or see in ourselves that is good, that brings its impulse from the divine nature. So human love ought to be a mirror to divine love. And the intention is that all human relationships should be shaped by God's love, but also in Scripture they function as metaphors for it. In other words, they are images. The biblical writers look at human relationships and kind of pull out points of similarity with the relationship that we have with God, or that God has with his people. So when we see human relationships at their best, we are glimpsing a pale reflection of God's love. And I want to emphasize that, when we see human relationships at their best. So we'll begin by looking at parental love. So we're going to begin with a couple of the prophets. So these are people speaking to God's ancient people, the people that God made covenant with on Mount Sinai. And we spoke about the covenant in one of the earliest videos in this series. So the deal with the covenant was that God gave the people a way to live in faithfulness to him and to one another, and said that if they kept that covenant, then they would be able to remain in the land. But as they continually broke that covenant, he sent prophets to warn them. So the first of the two that we're going to look at today is a prophet called Hosea, and Hosea has a kind of an extended appeal to the people to return to in faithfulness to God. We're going to return to Hosea in a minute because most of his metaphor is about kind of husband and wife metaphor. But in Hosea 11 we read a parental metaphor. Listen to this. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more I called Israel, the further they went from me. I don't know if you've ever watched or been a parent pursuing a toddler who's made up their mind they're going to run away from their parents. My parents used to tell me the story of a time when I just took off on the beach, and they kind of looked up and I was already several hundred meters away. Well, I don't know, a long way off, and they called me and I just belted further and further away from them, and they had to run to pick me up. That's the image that the prophet is using here. And then he goes on, it was I who taught them to walk, taking them by the arms, but they didn't realise it. It was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with ties of love. And that's, I think that's a metaphor for what we would these days call kind of reins. I don't know if you use or have seen toddler reins, little straps put around a toddler for a parent to hold on to so that the toddler can run. And when they tumble, the parent scoops them up so they don't fall flat on their face, and they've got a little bit of freedom, but they're not going to run off into the road. I think this is the image here, this beautiful image of God teaching his people to walk, stooping over them. You know, the way parents help their toddlers to walk, they bend over and they hold their fingers, and it's quite a back-breaking thing to do because toddlers are little. This is a beautiful metaphor. And then leading on from this metaphor, remembering that this is a disobedient child that he is speaking to, he says this: "How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, Israel? My heart is changed within me. All my compassion is aroused. I will not carry out my fierce anger." So here we see this metaphor extends to the metaphor of a parent who is angry, but actually just their heart melts when they see their child, because they love them so much that they just can't follow through on the threat that they have made. The second prophet that we're going to look at is Isaiah. And Isaiah is speaking in the second half of his book. He's speaking to people who have suffered the consequences of their breach of covenant and have been displaced from their land. And he's speaking comfort from Isaiah 40 onwards. The main burden of the message is one of comfort and promise. And in Isaiah 66, as part of that comfort message, as part of that promise that God has not yet finished with his people, we read these words: "As a mother comforts her child, so will I comfort you." You might be familiar with speaking about God as a father. Of course, Jesus invites us to pray, "Our Father in heaven." But I'm wondering if you're aware of quite how much metaphor there is for God as a mother in Scripture. But if we return to the father image for a moment, then of course we really cannot ignore the parable of the prodigal son, which Jesus told. This is in Luke 15, and he tells the story of a son who manages to get his share of the inheritance from his father while he's alive. He runs away with it, he wastes it all, comes to be destitute, and eventually comes to his senses and decides to come back and throw himself on the mercy of his father. And then I'll pick up the story as Jesus told it. "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" So these three passages from Hosea, from Isaiah, and Jesus' words in Luke 15 are just some of the places in Scripture where parental love, paternal love, and maternal love are seen to be reflections of God's love for his people. Well, the second great metaphor is the one of husband and wife. So in Hosea chapter 2, Hosea is an extended uses this extended metaphor, and sometimes I can't deny that the language that is used is quite uncomfortable. We need to remember that marriages in the ancient world were very different from what a good marriage looks like today, and we know much more through the teaching of Jesus. We know much more about how husbands and wives should love one another. So if you delve into Hosea and find some disturbing imagery and language, please take it in that context. Understand that the violence of punishment that you're seeing there, this is not intended to describe how husbands and wives should relate to one another. It's using a flawed metaphor from the ancient world. So in Hosea, but we do see a real tenderness of God in these passages. So in Hosea 2, "In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. I will remove the names of the Baals from her lips. No longer will their names be invoked." Now let me just pause here a minute. So the false gods that Israel was worshipping were called Baals. You may know the word if you've dipped into your Old Testament. But Baal just means master. And so here we've got this kind of a bit of a pun going on, because Israel is being unfaithful to the Baals. But in a sense, they are therefore kind of enslaving themselves to these masters, if you like. And God, through Hosea, picks up on this image and says, "You're going to call me my husband, not my master, because I don't want to be a master to you. I want to be a husband to you." And later in the same chapter, he says this, picking up on the covenant imagery that we've spoken about so often: "I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. And then in Ephesians chapter 5, we also see this image being picked up by the Apostle Paul. And he says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And he goes on to talk about what that looks like. And then towards the end of that passage, he kind of falls over himself between the actual husbands and wives and the Christ church relationship. Listen to the way he keeps interrupting himself here. He begins by quoting Genesis. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery. But I'm talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must always also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So for Paul, the two things kind of explain one another. Now, I want to acknowledge again that for many of us, our experience of these relationships, relationships with our parents or with our children, relationships with our husbands and wives, perhaps is not ideal and does not naturally point us towards God. Remember what I said at the beginning, that these relationships, when they are at their best, are a pale reflection of God's love. So, how can we find hope in this? My invitation to you is this. When you look at the world around you this week, when you are in the park and you see parents minding, caring for, playing with, loving their children, when you see a couple who have been faithfully married for 50, 60, 70 years, devoted love of a husband for his wife or a wife for her husband, perhaps when the partner has become frail, sick, or suffers dementia. Or perhaps even when you go to the arrivals lounge at an airport and see those joyful reunions. When you see human love, celebrate the love that you see and take this as an imperfect, blurred mirror of the love of God. And here's another reason why we can have hope.